For your safety.
그러면 잠깐 지나가겠습니다.
Okay, you start.
I'm going to Drums, North Korea. Yes, you hear that right? I'm going to North Korea for about 5 days. I'm flying out today. Today is Saturday, and I'll be back on Thursday. And it's an organized tour, of course, because you cannot go there on your own. And I'm very excited to discover this or see this country that is, well, fascinating to me.
Each year, about 6,000 Western tourists visit North Korea. This is our story of our trip to North Korea. This will give you an idea of what you can expect if you ever consider going. And if you're just curious, it'll give you an inside look of what North Korea is like and what the tours are like. One of the most unsettling things was when we first arrived in the airport, the tour guides took our passports and they said they would give it back at the end of the tour, 5 days later.
Okay, we're in Pyongyang. I made it through the customs. It went pretty smooth actually. It's much easier than I expected it to be. And right now I'm at the Architriumph of Pyongyang, and it's a lot bigger than the one in Paris.
Much bigger.
Much bigger. You see it behind me. See, it's in the middle of a... It doesn't even fit in the frame. There we go.
We were there for 5 days, and although we didn't have a lot of freedom to film everything, we did get some raw footage of our time there. These stories that I'm about to tell are designed to give you a first-hand experience of what North Korea is really like. We went to North Korea on a whim. The Chinese New Year was coming up and we didn't have any plans when I saw an advertisement saying, "Come to North Korea." So we thought, why not? What could possibly go wrong?
So, I'm in the first floor of the hotel, which is actually the ground floor, and exploring a bit. There's a lot actually. Let's walk back. We just missed it. Like right here. It's a beauty salon. Here, you go here. Then a swimming sauna, massage place. But I read actually that some of the massages are special ones. So I wouldn't take the risk. Let me put it that way. And well, just earlier saw the you can see the karaoke. It was a karaoke. And there's table tennis area. There's a lot actually. There's nothing to do in this hotel. I mean, well, they have to, I guess, because you can't go out without your guide. So what else are you gonna do?
And so one of the reasons the hotel has so much to offer is because you're not actually allowed to leave the hotel without a minder. So we had 3 minders on our tour. These are Korean tour guides, and they're called minders, and we were not allowed to go anywhere without them. It just was not allowed. You could go anywhere within the hotel, but if you tried to go outside the hotel and off of the hotel premise, you would end up getting in trouble basically. And basically they were watching you the whole time, so there was no way for you to go out into Pyongyang and explore on your own. So the hotel had a lot to offer. As you can see, bowling, ping pong, karaoke, bar, multiple bars, rooftop bar, first floor bar, gift shop, many things for you to do within the hotel, because they didn't really want tourists wandering off or trying to leave. If you're entertained in the hotel, you won't try and find entertainment outside of the hotel. And so that was kind of the first day there. We got off the plane, we surrendered our passports, we went and saw this Arc de Triomphe, and then we went to the hotel where they were like, okay, this is where you're gonna stay for most of the time when you're here in Pyongyang. So the first night we obviously had a dinner. Food in North Korea, let's just maybe start with that. So we were there for 5 days, and one of the things that we continuously ran into was bad food. There was a lot of things that resembled foreign food, but tasted nothing like it. So it seems like the cooks were instructed to give us foreign style food, but they didn't know what foreign style food tasted like. They didn't know what foreign food tasted like. So we had fish and chips some nights. We had lots of different breakfast items that were just not quite right. The idea was there, but the flavoring and the taste was far from what you would expect. Overall, the food that they gave us was very westernized, which was disappointing because the few times that they gave us Korean food, the few times that we actually had Korean food, it was actually really good. Because they know how to make it. They have the ingredients, they know how to make it. It's common in their country, and so when we ate it, it tasted like Korean food. We've been to South Korea before, and now in North Korea, the food was similar, like bibimbap or bulgogi or some of these other dishes. We had a very limited amount of that in North Korea, but when we did have it, those were the best meals because they tasted the most authentic, and it seemed like the cooks actually knew what they were preparing in those specific meals. So on day 2, we went to see the glorious leaders lying in state. This was interesting. I've never actually seen somebody lying in state before. So we went into multiple chambers, a massive palace. We went through all these different buildings, we went through all these different rooms, kind of leading up to the actual bodies that are lying in state. So when we got to the final hall where the bodies are actually lying in state, the 2 previous leaders, it was really hard to describe, to be honest. There was a lot of tension, I guess would be the best way to say it. It wasn't weird seeing them lying in state, but the general atmosphere, especially as a foreigner being there, was really unnerving because you had these military generals and these military people in the room with you, and they were there to see their great glorious leaders, and they were bowing down, and they were really this was almost like they were seeing a god in their mind, and for us it's very different. The way that we see North Korea and the way that we see the leaders of North Korea is very different. So there was almost this weird tension in the room where there was extreme excitement and reverence from the North Koreans, and then with our tour group there was almost like this comedic aspect, like it was so bizarre and so weird to be bowing in front of basically, I don't know if it's the real bodies or if it's like wax bodies, but you're bowing in front of basically a dead body and showing respect. And so it was just an unbelievably tense and awkward moment for me specifically, because seeing this all playing out, the different military people, obviously North Korean people, they're giving respects to the leaders, seeing how the foreigners in our group are reacting, feeling awkward to be bowing in front of essentially a dead body, given the history of North Korea and given the history that I know of North Korea. It was one of the most bizarre experiences I think I've ever had. And yeah, I mean, it was just awkward.
We're outside now. We just went inside right here to see Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-il. They're in state.
That was a really unique experience. After that, we went to another museum, the Fatherland Museum, the Glorious Fatherland Military, I don't know what the name is, I'll put it on the screen. It was some ridiculous name about the Glorious Fatherland War Museum, War Memorial. And basically day 2 was the craziest day, I think, in terms of my mind, because they hit you hard with the propaganda and they didn't let up on day 2. So we went and saw the leaders lying in state, and then we went to this war museum where we were toured around the whole museum, and everything that they were saying is exact opposite than what we are taught as foreigners. So they believe that they won the Korean War. They also believe that they beat the Japanese at the end of World War II, basically. They say that they pushed the Japanese out of Korea, and then when the Americans showed up, they stopped the American invasion and stopped the imperialistic forces from Japan and from the United States. And the weirdest part for me was when we were walking around this museum. The museum itself was a normal museum. I mean, there's pictures, there's, you know, details of how they see history. But the weirdest part was the guide was telling us how they had these glorious victories over the imperialistic forces that were trying to take control of them and suppress them. And then the power would cut out. And we'd be in pitch black in this museum. And they're talking about this glorious victory, but they couldn't keep the power on in their own capital. This was a common reoccurrence. And we'll talk about infrastructure. We'll talk about infrastructure because infrastructure was well maintained in the capital, but as soon as we left the capital, the streets were falling apart. We went to different hotels and there was no power, there was no hot water. The area was everything, all the wealth is concentrated in the capital. So even the capital couldn't keep the power on, which was so telling of the infrastructure problems that they have. We would go to these magnificent museums and we'd go to these magnificent statues and architecture, and the power wouldn't be on. We would have to wait outside and we'd see people running around and you know, people would be talking on the phone or on walkie-talkies, and then I mean, you'll be standing there outside and you can see that there's no power on, and then somebody flips on a generator, power comes on, then you go inside and you walk around for a little bit, the power is a little bit sporadic, and then you leave, and you assume that whoever was responsible for this museum then goes and shuts the power off, and it doesn't remain on most of the time or all of the time, just because they don't have the power. So the infrastructure was pretty bad. Even when we went to their newest museum, it was a science library and a science museum. Even in there, all the computers were very outdated. All of the books and everything seemed very old. And this was their newest museum. This was their pride and joy that they were creating, that they had just built and had opened recently when we went there. And in the end, it was just kind of sad. That was the best way to describe the infrastructure. It was just kind of sad because these people believe that their leaders are doing everything they can to help them. But in reality, the leaders don't seem to be doing everything they could be doing. They could be doing more, potentially working with international partners, you know, obviously not threatening other countries with nuclear war, and that would help improve the lives of their citizens, but their citizens don't understand that dynamic, and so they suffer because of that, and their infrastructure suffers because of that. So day 2, we went to this museum, the power was cutting out, and that was in the morning. In the afternoon, we also went to the science museum. You know, I mean, there was a lot of people there, a lot of people playing on computers, and the guides were really excited, telling us how this new science museum or this new science center was going to help young people learn about science and technology, and how it was going to boost education and the economy in a sense.
We're in a science center. It's just really open for the tourists, and it's pretty cool. There's a lot of people here.
So after the science museum, science center, we went to a grocery store, and at the grocery store you can actually change money and get Korean won for North Korea. Now, they say it's illegal for foreigners to have this, and quite frankly, we weren't supposed to take it out of the country, but they're not super strict on it, which was okay. It was an interesting experience. Obviously, going into the grocery store, there was many Chinese products on the shelves, but the Chinese products had been obviously relabeled with Korean labels, so it looked like it was Korean products. But because we've lived in China for a long time, we could actually recognize most of the products on the shelves. And obviously they were produced in China and then brought to Korea with different labels. So a lot of their trade, almost all of their trade, comes from China. And that was interesting to experience this grocery store. Obviously we walked around, we were able to buy some products, and actually in the video you'll see some of the things that we bought at the grocery store. But that was pretty much the second day, and after that we got on the bus and we drove to another city in North Korea. So day 2 was filled with a lot of propaganda, starting with seeing the leaders lying in state, then going to the War Museum, then going to the Science Center, and then going to a grocery store, and then finally we got on a bus and ended up in another town.
We're back. After the museum that you just saw, there was no chance to film anymore. We went to a supermarket, had lunch, and the supermarket couldn't film, and then it was night and dark. But now we're in the hotel, not in Pyongyang anymore, but another hotel. And I didn't just come in and did not take my hat off or take my jacket off yet. It's just really cold here. I can see my breath. But luckily there's a big blanket and a electric blanket, so I think I'm gonna be okay. So I mentioned the supermarket. So I got some snacks mostly and drinks. This is a green bottle apple drink. No clue. They don't have Oreos here with D.P.R.K. They have Okies. They look very similar to the Oreo cookies though. I'm gonna drink something with lemon. I love lemon drinks, so I had to try this. And then our last drink. Oh, the bottle is very sticky and dirty. What is it? Oh, it's with oranges. And oh, it's a soda. So I think it would be something similar as Fanta. Cookies. Haven't tried them yet. Some Korean chips, snacks. Finally some candy, strawberry flavored candy. Okay.
So on day 3 we woke up and we went to the demilitarized zone.
This is Panmunjom. Panmunjom lies on the military demarcation line of the Korean Peninsula.
The DMZ, and we went to this on the North Korean side. We have previously been there on the South Korean side, but this is basically the border between North and South Korea. And obviously it was full of propaganda. There was a lot of history that was I guess you would say manipulated to benefit the North Koreans. The way that they see the history and the way they see the war ending was they won. And so they make sure to make a big point of that when they talk to, obviously, foreign tourists. They say, we won the war and we beat the Americans. And they also say that they beat the UN, kind of the UN forces, because they were saying that it was a correlation force of UN forces and US forces, and they talk about how they won and stopped the invasion, basically. They never mention China's help, they never mention Russia's help. They did it all on their own, which is a very interesting point in my mind, knowing a little bit of the history, in especially living here in China, and how the Chinese people see the Korean War. And it's very different, and the fact that they don't acknowledge the millions of Chinese lives that were lost was actually pretty interesting, in my opinion. But the demilitarized zone, it wasn't too tense, to be honest. We'd already been there, and so it wasn't really that weird. We'd been there, like I said, on the South Korean side, so it wasn't really that weird. The feel there was just kind of like, all right, we're here, it's interesting. But this is probably where I should start talking about the tour itself. So anybody who wants to go to North Korea has to have either an extremely kind of perverse fascination with it, or there's something not quite right, us included. Again, like I said, it was kind of on a whim for us. We had thought about it in the past, and then we just kind of went. So we hadn't really dwelled on it. We hadn't really dwelt on it very long when we made our decision, which is probably the best way to do it. If you decide to go, just go. But be aware that when you go, you're with a tour. And so there was quite a few people on the tour that were strange. I guess that'd be the best way to put it. The DMZ issue that we had with the tour was there was one older gentleman who, his story wasn't very clear. Either he fought in the North Korean War or his father fought in the North Korean War, the Korean War. So he was an American guy, and his father, I'm pretty sure it's his father who fought in the Korean War back in the 50s, because this guy was about in his 60s or 70s. And he was there on some kind of apology tour for what his father did in the Korean War, 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago, which was really awkward, because at the DMZ, he really wanted to talk to these young soldiers. Most of the North Korean soldiers are in their early 20s, and he was trying to, have the minder, our tour guide, our Korean tour guide, translate his apology to these soldiers at the DMZ, to the point that we were all starting to feel very uncomfortable, because you don't know how that is going to go down. We assume that the tour guide was not translating what he was actually saying, because she's probably dealt with people like this before, and she just chose to say, oh, this American guy thinks your uniform is very handsome, or some BS. But I don't know what she was translating. Obviously, the North Korean soldiers didn't seem to speak any English, other than just hello and goodbye, that kind of thing. They were very friendly, but the fact that this individual on our tour was trying to apologize for, I guess, what he thought were war crimes? I don't know what he was apologizing for, but basically his father was in the Korean War and maybe killed some Koreans, or he felt that his father was responsible for what happened to North Korea because of the Korean War, and he thought it was his job to come to North Korea and apologize. So we had some interesting characters on our tour. We'll talk about a few more of them later in this video, but they were strange. That's the best way to put it. Some of them were strange. So after the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, we went back to Pyongyang, which is the capital, and on the way back we stopped at this friendship arch, basically, and it's these two Korean women, basically, holding some kind of heart or plaque in the middle to symbolize friendship, and big monument. Interesting to see. And then we continued our trip into Pyongyang, and we went to a shooting range. And the shooting range was actually a lot of fun, at least in my opinion. I'd never shot a gun before, and of course these aren't real guns, because we just had the little pistols, but it was fun to shoot a gun. And now I can say honestly that I can honestly say that the first time I shot a gun was in North Korea, which is always interesting to have, especially as an American, because most Americans shoot guns when they're growing up. Well, maybe not most, but a lot of them do. And so my first experience shooting what would be considered, I guess, real gun was in North Korea. I mean, I don't think this would kill you if you got shot with one of these little bullets, because they were just little, I don't know, like real small bullets. Like I don't know anything about guns. Maybe they're like 22s or something, because they were real small. And of course, when you shoot, they're just basically for target practice. But you know, it's a real gun. And so I can now say that the first time I ever shot a gun was in North Korea, which is always an interesting conversation starter. And then after that, we went to the square, which is the main square, the Kim Il-sung Square, which is the main square in North Korea where they have all their rallies. And since we were there during the Chinese New Year, or during the New Year, because they also celebrate New Year on the lunar calendar. Of course, they don't call it Chinese New Year, they just call it the New Year. We were there and they were dancing in the square. And so that was a lot of fun. Now, we thought it was spontaneous, and of course the guides said it was spontaneous, that, oh, this is just a celebration for the New Year. And they had also recently launched a missile satellite into space, and they were saying, oh, they're celebrating the New Year, they're celebrating the launch of the satellite. When we got back, we read comments from other people who have been to North Korea, and they said they also had the square dancing. So it could have been staged, and a lot of people said that this is a staged part. They know foreigners find this really exciting. But for us, we were there in this massive square, Kim Il-sung Square, and the snow was coming down, and there was all the women dressed up in their traditional dresses, and the men were well dressed. One thing about Korean people, North Korean people, is they're all very well dressed. It's part of the culture. You don't see anybody in jeans and like tank tops. Everybody is always in nice suits. The women are very well dressed. The men are always dressed in suits. So that was interesting to see a large group of people, large group of North Koreans dancing in the square, and you could actually go in and kind of dance. You see Yvonne dancing with the people. So that was cool, and then it ended that night with fireworks. So day 3 was a busy day, but at the end we had this great big firework display, and they say that that was spontaneous, and we just happened to come across this celebration. But then reading other comments, it seems like maybe not so spontaneous. And this was one of the things, the whole time we were there in North Korea, they had this ability to always give you kind of an option. You can go bowling, or you can go ice skating. You can go on a helicopter ride, or you can go walk around the city. You can go here, you can go there. So it's always this illusion of choice, but each item or each activity is actually staged. So yes, you can go on the helicopter ride, which is a lot of fun, but that's your choice. If you didn't choose to go on the helicopter ride, then you can choose to walk around the city and do a walking tour of the capital. So always this kind of illusion of choice, which makes it seem like everything isn't staged. But in reality, each activity is kind of staged. It's pretty formatted, so that you don't really have the opportunity to wander off and see the real Korea, the real capital, because you're in these specific locations that have been designed to keep you occupied, basically, to keep you looking at a statue and not looking behind you about what's going on over here. And so that was always interesting dynamic of the trip. Everything seemed kind of like we had a choice. You could do this, you could do that, which was in its own way very cleverly designed, very interesting. So after the firework display, we actually went back and had a Korean barbecue dinner, which was okay, and then it was back to the hotel to sleep. In the second part, we'll continue our journey in North Korea. Be sure to subscribe or check the link below to find out how our journey ends.